I know you have a lot of readings this week on sampling, and they're all very important. I want to take a few minutes to talk about some of the most important terminology that you're going to cover this week to make sure everybody's very clear on it. But when we're looking at samples, we're looking at who we're going to study. Now, in reality, we want to study an entire population. We want to study everyone that matches the characteristics we're looking for. But in reality, that's usually not feasible. If we're looking at a communication phenomenon that's going to affect the entire human race, we can't possibly track everybody down to get them to participate in our study. Therefore, we want to gather a representative sample that we can draw conclusions from. When we talk about sampling, there are two overarching categories of sampling. The first is random sampling, sometimes called probability sampling. In random sampling, members of the population have equal opportunity to be selected for the sample. Random sampling is ideal. It's most likely to truly represent your participant or your population in terms of demographics and any particularities that you're looking for. On the other hand, we have non-random sampling, which is also sometimes called non-probability sampling. Non-random sampling happens when not everybody has equal chance. Ideally, you always want to use a type of random sampling, but the reality is sometimes that's too difficult. You just can't get a hold of the people you need. So what are the types of random sampling? To make this a little more concrete, let's come up with a scenario. Okay, let's imagine that I am teaching a mass lecture with 400 students, and I want to survey a sample of those students because I don't have time to make everybody participate in my survey during class. So I need a sample of 40 students to participate. Simple random sampling is a method of sampling in which everyone has equal opportunity with no interference by the researcher. So for example, if I take all 400 students' names, put them in a really big bowl, and then draw 40 out without looking, that's simple random sampling. Systematic random sampling happens whenever you have a systematic way of selecting participants from a random start point. So for example, imagine that I have all 400 students come in and take a seat, and then I draw from a hat which chair I'm going to start with, and then every 10th student from that chair that I start with, I ask to participate in the study. Stratified sampling happens whenever you need certain proportions to be matched. So you divide your potential participants into subgroups. Imagine that I need my questionnaire to be equally distributed to freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. So before I start sampling, I first pull out all my freshmen, and then I simply random sample 10 of them. And then I do a simple random sample on my sophomores to get 10. Same for juniors, same for seniors. That way, each class is equally represented, and I've engaged in simple random sampling. Cluster sampling is based on physical location. So again, imagine that I'm assuming that people probably want to sit with their friends, and their friends have similar characteristics. So I am going to actually chop up my classroom into 10 different zones. And from those zones, I'm going to simple random sample 4 people out of each zone, because depending on how big their friend group is, I don't want certain types of students to be overrepresented. Then on the other hand, we have the non-random sampling options, the first of which is convenient sampling. Convenient sampling is exactly what it sounds like. I grab whoever's most convenient. So that would probably mean that I would grab the first 40 students who walk in, hopefully before class, and ask them to fill out my questionnaire before class even starts. Convenient sampling is not a form of random sampling because when you're grabbing whoever's convenient, you're probably getting people of like characteristics. For example, those students who show up to class really early, they have certain characteristics in common that allow them to show up to class early. Second thing is a volunteer sample. Again, this is what you would expect if I look at all 400 of my students and ask, who's willing to participate in this study? Now, odds are what those students have in common is they want to fall within my good graces, which means they're probably not going to represent the entire class very well. Next, you have purposive sampling. Purposive sampling is a type of sampling when you have a very specific characteristic in mind. So for example, imagine that I need all 40 of my participants to be left-handed for some reason. Purposive sampling means that I am going to give everybody a writing assignment and then watch carefully to see who is left-handed, hunt them down, and beg them to participate in my study. Again, this isn't random because I am grabbing and begging as I see. Not everyone has equal opportunity because if I find 40 before I get to the back of the room, I'm just going to stop. Next, we have quota sampling. Quota sampling is sort of like stratified sampling because you want a certain proportion. So imagine I need 75% of my sample to be right-handed and 10% to be left-handed. Well, I would go about gathering people typically through convenience, perhaps through volunteer sampling, until I max myself out. Probably I'm going to max myself out on right-handed people first, and then I'm going to purposefully hunt down the other participants that I need to finish my proportions. Finally, we have snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is a type of sampling in which you ask people to pass it on. You probably actually see this a lot in your email. Hey, would you participate in this study and then send it to one other person or 2 other people? In the classroom, this would be saying to the first 5 students that walk in, hey, would you fill out this questionnaire and then talk, 5 more people into doing it and ask them to talk people into doing it and so on and so forth. Snowball is a little deceptive because you don't know where your questionnaire is actually going to snowball out to. But the reality of the situation is you usually end up with people with similar characteristics. For example, if you're asked to fill out one of these questionnaires and then find someone else to do it, who are you going to ask? More likely, your friends. Well, if you ask your friends are like you, so you're not actually getting a diverse picture of the population, but rather a very specific subset of like-minded people. So overall, random sampling is the best. You always want a random sample whenever possible. However, sometimes it's just not realistic to get a random sample because you'll never find enough people. And that's why sometimes we use a non-random sample, but we always have to acknowledge that as a limitation of our study. We also want to make sure that when we are reporting a study that we give a thorough overview of the demographics of our sample so that people can see not only how close they come to matching the population, but also account for any sampling error if they do a meta-analysis in the future.